grade. This is going to reset everything on my node. Okay, until now, we have been balancing the whole image, fixing white balance, tint, temperature, etc. Now, you are going to go a step ahead into the artistry. Okay, until now, we have been balancing the whole image, fixing white balance, tint, temperature, etc. Now, you are going to go a step ahead into the artistry of color grading, which is adjusting the light inside your footage. This is also a very important step in color grading. In DaVinci Resolve, we have a few different ways to adjust the lighting of our footage. So over here, I have the same footage that I've used in a couple of previous lessons. And I already have it converted to Rec 709. I'm just going to quickly show you the settings so that when you convert it, you also use the same settings, because I shot this with my Sony FX3. With the CST Color Space Transform node selected, I'm going to click on Effects, and it's going to show me the input settings as well as the output settings for my camera and the software. So in the previous lessons, I adjusted the white balance of this clip with you guys. This is the same white balance node that I used. I made a node over here called EXP, which stands for exposure. Exposure deals with lighting. So the first method to fix the lighting of your footage is by using the color wheels in the primary section. So this is the primary section, and these are our color wheels that we're going to use to adjust the lighting of our footage. Once your white balance is perfect, the next step you're always going to do is adjust the exposure of your footage. It is going to be a very rare situation where you're going to get a footage and the exposure or lighting in your footage is going to be perfect. 99% of the times, whenever I get any footage, I have to adjust the lighting inside it somehow a little bit. So, over here in the primary color wheels, we have 4 very powerful controls. They're called lift, gamma, gain, and offset. Each one of these controls a different zone of brightness in your footage, as well as color. But right now we're going to focus on lighting. Let's go through these one by one. So make sure when you're practicing with me, you have an exposure node created, because we don't want to do our white balance and exposure on the same node. That is going to be too much work that you're going to be doing on the same node. It's going to mess things up. So always have a separate node for each of the steps. So with the exposure node selected, I'm going to show you how I will use offset to fix the lighting in my footage. Offset affects the lighting of the entire image. It affects highlights, midtones, shadows, all at once. How do I use offset to fix my lighting? I'm going to go to this wheel over here. So I'm going to click and drag it towards my right, and you'll see that my footage gets brighter. Now I think it's too bright. How do I fix it? There are 2 ways of going about it. I can either click over here, and this is going to take me to the previous step, or I can right click over here and reset node grade. This is going to reset everything on my node and take it to point number 0. But I'm not going to do this, because if I have a couple of steps that I've done in lighting, and if I press this, it's going to undo all of those steps. So I'm going to go ahead and press this, or Control Z, whichever works. If I click and drag the offset wheel in the opposite direction, my image gets darker, because offset is going to affect the overall lighting of your footage. So I usually don't use offset too much. I use these wheels. Next up is gain. Gain affects your highlight areas mainly. So if I do the same thing, if I move it up, it mainly brightens my highlights, but you can see that it is also affecting my midtones and shadows. Same thing, if I move it in the opposite direction, things are gonna get darker. It is gonna make my highlights dark, but at the same time, it's also gonna affect my midtones and shadows. So I'm gonna press undo, move ahead. Gamma works on your midtones. So if I move it towards the right, it's gonna make my image brighter. But again, it's not just affecting my midtones, it's also affecting my highlights and my shadows. I'm gonna move it in the opposite direction and you'll see the same thing happening. And lift affects your shadows. So if I click and move it towards the right, it's gonna make my image really bright. But again, it's also affecting other parts of the image as well. That's because the primary color wheels, whichever wheel you use, it's not gonna stick to the specific area entirely that you're using it for. It is gonna have some effect on the other areas. But if you specifically want to affect certain areas and not have the effect spill over onto other areas, I will show you some other tricks later on in just a couple of sessions. So whenever I want to fix the general exposure or the lighting in my footage, I use my color wheels. And then I also use some other settings to affect specific areas of my footage, which I will show you later on. So we have an understanding of how we can use these color wheels to adjust the lighting of our highlights, midtones, and shadows, or the overall lighting in our footage. But here is where things are gonna get cooler. So I'm gonna go ahead first of all, because my footage already has low exposure. What I really wanna fix over here is if you take a look at it, I don't want my shadows to get milkier and flatter by bringing them up too much. I'm gonna play with gamma and gain because those are the ones that I usually play with. The thing that I usually do is I see where my subject lies in terms of my highlights, midtones, and shadows. So my subject lies within midtones mostly, and then some of the shadows, and very little bit of the highlights probably here. So mainly I have to bump up my midtones. So I'm gonna bring it up a little bit, maybe slightly bring up my highlights. And this is how I have quickly fixed the lighting in my footage. Now all I need to do is go ahead and start grading it, start working on it. These wheels are not just for lighting. The overall color wheels over here we have, they're not just used for lighting. I can also add red, blue, and green in my highlights, midtones, and shadows, or onto my overall image separately using these color wheels. So for example, over here, the white balance of my footage has been fixed, but I feel like, okay, maybe there's a little bit of tint on my... This is how the lighting originally was, but I just don't like it right now. So I have fixed the white balance. Now I'm moving towards a little bit of the grading part. This is going to be called primary color grading, which is where we fix our lighting and a little bit of the color correction that we do to our footage. So let's say I want to decrease green from my overall image. So you see the channels over here, you have red, green, and blue, and you have them everywhere in all of the wheels. This tells you that you can increase or decrease these specific colors from within your image or in specific areas of the image separately. So when I used the gain wheel to bump up my highlights and the gamma wheel to bump up my midtones, Do you see? It has given equal values to red, green, blue over here too. That's because it used equal amounts of those colors to bump up the lighting in my footage. But let's say I want this overall green tint to go. When I was shooting the footage, there was some green tint in my overall image at that time because of the lighting that was in the room. So I want to bring down the overall green tint. So I'm gonna hover over this area, click and drag it towards the left side. Do you see how it automatically fixed a lot of the stuff in my video? You can see that the green tint that I was talking about, that is pretty much gone, right? So if I click on undo, this is how it looked. And this is how it looks now, right? So let's say I want a little bit more towards the warmer side. I can bring up red a little bit higher. So do you see what's happening already? So I'm going to press undo, and this is how it looked originally. And this is the kind of look and feel that I gave it. But this is just for an example. You don't have to follow it. And I think that it looks too red. So I'm going to bring it down a little bit. So this isn't just where our color wheels stop helping us. So for example, then I'm going to give you another example. Let's say I want more blue in my midtones, just as an example. I can click and drag this towards the right side, and you see how it's adding blue to my midtones and to other areas of my video overall. So using these settings, I'm gonna undo it. Using these settings, you can fix the lighting in your video with these wheels, as well as add separate values of red, green, and blue to separate parts of your video or your overall video. One thing that I really use them for is creating different kinds of looks and feels when I'm doing my color grading. And what do I mean by that? Do you see the color wheel underneath each of the sections? We have a separate color wheel for lift, separate for gamma, separate for gain, and a whole other wheel for offset, which means I can add any of these colors to my overall image or to specific parts of my image. And I will show you exactly what I mean by that. So I usually, after fixing the exposure, I will create another node by holding Alt and pressing S on my keyboard. This is because this node, I call it look. What does the look node do? I use the look node to create an overall look and feel for my video. This is where I start doing the coloring part, where I start adding different colors to my video. I start adding different tints, tones, and all kinds of things to my video. And I want to show you how I will do that. So for example, if I want my overall video to, let's say, be a bit warmer, I'm going to click and drag this tiny circle more towards orange. And do you see how it automatically adds warmer tones to my overall video? This is because offset not only affects the overall lighting, but it also affects the overall colors of your footage. Let's say I want to add purple in my highlights, and please do not take it as any aesthetic advice. I'm just giving you examples of how you can use these color wheels. We are going to go ahead in the later sections and create those specific aesthetic look and feels when we're going to go to that section. So let's say I want to add purple in my highlights. So I'm going to click and drag this tiny circle towards purple. And do you see how it automatically adds purple in my overall image as well? Because gain mainly affects highlights, but it's also going to affect your shadows and your midtones and everything. And let's say I want to add green in my midtones. This is going to be hideous. But here we are. So I just wanted to give you an understanding of how we can use these primary color wheels to our advantage. And I also use all of them in my color grading. As a matter of fact, I use these 95% of the time in my color grading projects. We just don't stop here. After color, so I'm gonna go ahead and reset these because I want to show you another way of working with lighting and colors just like we did right now. So in the primary section, we are in the color wheels section. Right next to it is color bars. So I'm gonna click it and it's gonna take me to the same settings, but instead of those right now, I have different bars. Instead of the wheels and the circles, mostly I have the color bars. So I'm gonna go ahead and click on exposure, the exposure node, because I want to be on my exposure node when I'm fixing my exposure. And same thing, offset is going to affect the overall lighting. So if I move it in one direction, it becomes brighter. If I click and drag it towards the left side, it's going to make the overall video very dark. Same thing goes for gain. Gain affects highlights. So if I move it towards the right, it's going to affect the highlights and make them brighter. If I click the wheel and move it towards the left, it's going to make everything look dark. Quickly showing you what gamma does, same thing. Move it toward the right, things get brighter. In the midtones, move it towards the left, things get darker. And lift affects shadows. Move it towards the right, things get lighter. Move it towards the left, things get darker. Same thing that I taught you. So I'm gonna go ahead and just fix the overall exposure right now so that I can show you the examples. And remember, I rarely use offset. I don't use offset too much. I mainly try to stick to gain and gamma, and we'll see why. So, for example, if I want to add, let's say, more red to my highlights, I can click this color bar and bring it up like this. Or I can click over here just like I did in the previous section and then bring it up or bring it down. Same goes for gamma and lift. Let's say I want green in my midtones. I can bring this up or bring it up like this. And another way that I use it, for example, with the parade is also like this. For example, right now I used it to fix the overall lighting. So all of the colors like R, G, and B have equal values. But let's say I want to add more blue to my video. So I can either click on these arrows and increase the value of blue separately, or I can bring it down like this or bring it up, or I can use this part. So you have a lot of options over here. I just wanted you to go through all of these so that you have a better understanding of how these things work. We don't have the option over here where we can add specific colors just like we can over here. So these are not available in the color bars. So I don't usually use the color bars too much. If I'm doing very specific stuff with white balance, that's when I use the color bars. But for my color grading stuff, I usually use the primary color wheels. So I hope that this section gives you a much better understanding of how things work in terms of fixing the lighting and everything. And I want you to use the same footage and start working on the lighting part. I want you to experiment with the offset, gain, gamma, lift, and try to add different colors. Like try to mess with the RGB values, and also try to add different colors using the color wheel section of the options to see how you can add different types of colors to different parts of the footage. So I hope this section helps you. And in the next section, I'm going to teach you how to work with specific areas only, how it's not going to affect midtones if you're just working with highlights, and so on and so forth. All right, so I hope you understand everything. If you have any questions, let me know and I will be more than happy to help you. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a section in the primary section, which is only going to target specific areas of your footage. For example, if you use it to target highlights, it's not going to have any effect on your midtones and shadows or wherever, except for the area that you're targeting. You're going to use this when you have very specific requirements from yourself or from the client, where let's say they say, hey, don't touch the shadows at all, just only fix the highlights, or vice versa. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my exposure node and reset it because I really want to work on this footage using those tools. So in the primary section, right next to color bars, you have log wheels. This is where I'm going to go. And again, over here you have offset, but then you have specific headings over here called highlights, midtones, shadows, and these correspond with the lift, gamma, gain, and everything that we saw in the previous section. But for example, having the exposure node selected, if I want to bump up the overall lighting, I'm going to do the same thing, click and drag towards the right. It's going to affect the overall lighting in my footage. And let's say I want to add blue. So I'm going to click and drag this tiny circle towards blue, and it's going to add it to the overall image, right? But let's say I fix up everything and I don't like it. I just clicked undo. And again, by observing my subject in my video, I can see that my subject again exists within midtones and shadows, as well as a little bit of highlights. So most of my subject is in the midtones. Even the black areas too, because the black looks really dark right now. That's why it's looking pure black. Otherwise, there are very gray areas over here. So I'm going to go to the midtones section and see what it does. So if I go to midtones and grab the wheel and click and drag it towards right, do you see how it's only affecting my midtones? It's not affecting the highlights or any other area in my footage, but it looks really bad because I really bumped it up to the extreme. I'm going to press back. I'm going to press undo. And then probably just going to bring up the lighting a little bit upwards overall, like this. And let's say now I want to work on my midtone. So I'm going to use this wheel, the midtone wheel, bring it up. Do you see how it's only affecting my midtones? It's not affecting my shadows at all. Let's say I want to bring up my shadows. Let's say I want to bring up my highlights a little bit. So I'm going to click on the highlights wheel and bring up my highlights. But do you see how I barely have any highlights? That's why it's only affecting those areas on the pillow. Because there's very little highlights, maybe slightly over here. That's probably why it's not even affecting any of those. So I'm probably going to bring up midtones a little bit like that. And just to show you as an example, if I click and drag the shadow wheel towards the right, it's going to start making my shadows lighter, milkier. And if I click and drag it towards the left, the opposite side, it makes my shadows really dark. It looks very, very bad because I dragged it to the extreme. This is where I want to introduce you to my personal method of darkening shadows. And later, 2 to 3 sessions down the line, you will see me doing the demo video where I will be fixing the lighting and adding contrast and everything in practice. And I will show you exactly how I will reach this step and go beyond these when I color grade my videos. So this is my secret sauce, one of the very, very secret parts, because people always ask me, how do you come up with those contrasting highlights and shadows? This is the answer. I go to the log wheels after fixing the contrast and the lighting and everything. I go to the log wheel and I just probably sometimes bring it down to 10 or something, -10. And it really bumps up those blacks in my video. And people love that look whenever I make it. So this is the secret sauce behind one of the many things that I do. So this was a very short video to introduce you to what the log wheels do. I hope you understand it. And if you have any questions, please send them in the group. I will get back to you ASAP. Please send me your work. I would love to see it. Thank you so much. And so next up is contrast. And I'm going to work on this particular footage because this one that I give you an example of, it was really dark and the exposure was really dark over there. This one has a much better exposure. And I want to give you like a really nice idea about what contrast is and how to use it. And I'm going to show you a couple of videos, not just one, of how I fix contrast in different videos whenever I work with the white balance and I'm done with it, and when I'm done with the lighting. The next part is contrast. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm quickly going to fix the lighting as per my understanding. I already have fixed the white balance with you guys in one of the previous lessons. I'm gonna go ahead and label it lighting or EXP. Whenever I want to work quickly, I bring up the offset or bring it down because that just affects the overall lighting in the video. And I'm probably also going to bring up a little bit of the midtones like the gamma. So one of the things that I like to do is I like to bring up the exposure way above than where I would like to be. Not extremely, but like a couple of points. Let's say if I want it to be at point A, I bring it to point B, because then I really can dial in the contrast. If I have the exposure right where I want it to be, this is my personal method, of course. Everybody's gonna have their own method. But I really, for example, if I wanted the exposure to be at 26, I brought it up to 28.4, because then I can dial in my contrast and I will have more range to control my contrast as opposed to having it at a perfect level when it comes to lighting and then bringing in my contrast. If my lighting is perfect, then I won't be able to bring a lot more contrast as per my method. Of course, everybody's going to have their own method. Every colorist has their own method of going about things. So I've quickly fixed the overall exposure. So once you start color grading, the first thing you do is you convert it to Rec 709 at the very end. Then one of the very first steps that you do is you fix the white balance. After you're done fixing the white balance, you fix the exposure, the lighting, because you want things to be visible properly. And once you have fixed the lighting in your video, what you're gonna do is press Option and hit S and create a new node, which I'm gonna call contrast. This is the next step in my color grading whenever I am color grading my projects. So one of the main things that I do to dial in my contrast is, for example, first of all, this is my favorite method. I have the contrast slider and the pivot slider, so you'll see exactly what they do. So contrast is at 1. If I click and drag it towards the right, do you see how it's adding more contrast to my image? So if I go here to the contrast node, turn it off, this is how it looked before I had any contrast. And this is how it looks now. And it's starting to look much more cinematic and everything. It's not looking like a normal video. You can see that, okay, something is happening over here, right? But I don't just stop at contrast. I also dial up my pivot slightly. So the values that you want to remember is I never go beyond 1.3 in my contrast, because see, if I go beyond, let's say if I go beyond 1.3, do you see how it's starting to get really weird? It starts to look very weird. So we're not going to do this, because do you see how my midtones and my shadows are completely blended? I don't even know what's over here, right? So I don't want to do that. I'm going to press Command Z and go back to the previous stage. And with my pivot, I don't go beyond 0.7. That is the max that I will do. So I'm going to show you what happens if I bring the pivot really up. So see how it's getting really dark, and again I'm losing details in my midtones and shadows and everything, and even my highlights look really weird. So I'm going to press Command Z, go back to the first point. It's starting to look more cinematic. I'm slightly going to bring this up because this is a video that was shot indoors. I'm going to also bring back a little bit of my pivot, just a little bit. So this is what it looked like when I did not have anything and I had only fixed the lighting. And this is how it starts to look when I add in a little bit of contrast. I'm going to show you one of my personal methods that I also again showed you in the previous lesson. I introduced you to it. So what I do is I will go in the primary section, I will go to the log wheels, and we talked about how these wheels only affect very specific areas of your footage. So I like to bring down my shadows from here like a little bit, sometimes around -10, -5 something. So this is how it looked before. Sorry, this is how it looked before I had any of the shadows from the log wheels dialed in. And this is how it looks after it. It just gives it that crisp, dark look that you really want in the shadows. I'm gonna go ahead and reset this because this scene already has a lot of dark areas and everything, and it was shot indoors, so I don't really need this part. Another thing that I really pay attention to is, again, in the primary section, I'm gonna go back to my color wheels, which is where I was working. And over here, there are two more options I want to introduce you to, which are shadows and highlights, and they do exactly what they are labeled for. Highlights controls highlights and shadows controls shadows. So sometimes you want to affect a little bit of the highlights from here, because sometimes these are too loose to work with because they're affecting other areas, and sometimes these are too tight to work with because they're only affecting very specific areas. I sometimes use them only to affect things a little bit, not too much. So I use my main stuff from here and from here. But when I want to add a little bit of that spice to it, that's where I go ahead and use highlights and shadows, and I'm going to show you exactly how that's going to work. So if I bring up the highlights a little bit, do you see how it's affecting mostly the highlights area? Like it's very evident. Like for example, look over here, those are overblown and everything. Just wanted to show you an example, but I'm going to press Command Z and go back to 0. So let's say I want to affect a little bit of my highlights with this highlight slider. I'm going to bring it up just a little bit. Not to the point where it starts blowing up my highlights, but just a little bit. And then shadows does the same thing. So for example, if I bring my highlights down, it's just going to make my image darker. Same thing happens over here. If I bring it up, it's going to make my image brighter. So bringing it back to 0 because I want to show you how these work. If I bring up my shadows, if I go to the shadow slider and bring up my shadows, it brightens my overall image. 0 is the center point. And then if I bring it down, it just makes my overall image really dark. So coming back to the center point, which is 0. I still think that there's a little bit of work that I need to do over here, not in terms of the shadows too much, but a little bit of the highlights. So I will use the highlight slider, slightly bring it up, and then, okay, it looks better, more cinematic. Let's see how it was looking before. So I can click around the bottom left corner of the node with my mouse and turn it off and then turn it on. Or I can press Command D and turn it off and turn it on. So here, this is the contrast node turned on. And let's say I want to bring a little bit of the shadows down because I want that crisp look. So maybe somewhere around here. This is how it looked before. See how the shadows were a little bit washed out? I want them to be like crisp black. Not completely black, but just that crispiness. So, and this is how it looked when I had the shadows dialed in with the shadow slider. So these 5 are my main areas. Whenever I'm working with contrast, I work with the contrast slider. I work with pivot, shadows, highlights, and then this is my secret sauce. I'm giving it away because I said no gatekeeping. I don't believe in gatekeeping. I believe in teaching all of the methods to people that are willing to learn the trade, because it's not just my trade. This is as much yours as it is mine. So this is where I dial in that secret sauce, and this is where I make it work. I hope this makes sense to you. Right now, I want you to build familiarity with the tools and how things work in the software, because I will take you through a demo video that I talked about in the previous lessons, and I will show you exactly how I will reach this point, and I will show you a couple of videos, not just one. I will maybe do it with a car, with people on a bike, or so on and so forth. So I'm not just going to leave you with this video. I will show you at least a couple of more examples so that you have more confidence as to what things are going to look like. All right. And one other thing that I want to talk to you about is the values. So usually I just don't go beyond 25 or something, but that really depends. Sometimes I do go beyond 50 or up to 50 depending on the situation of the footage. All of these things really depend on what kind of footage you have and what kind of lighting there was when they were recording it. But I'm just giving you the strict values I follow for contrast and pivot and the shadow wheel and the log wheels. So just keep those in mind. Sometimes it might be that you might go beyond minus 35, and that's fine. But I'm saying just don't go beyond minus 70 or something. That's when you want to start working with other areas in the DaVinci Resolve software to fix your footage and not just depend on one tool. So if you're using any one tool to the extremities, that's when you start to think that, okay, I need to use something else. Maybe something's wrong with the footage overall. All right, so I hope this makes sense. And in the next lesson, I will teach you how to create this exact look using the contrast curve. So So in this demo video, I will be color grading a couple of videos to show you my process and how I would go through the whole process of fixing the lighting and the white balance and fixing the overall contrast, and how I do all of these steps in my personal methods, in my personal way. So all I want is for you to observe how I put everything into practice and just try to practice it on your own. I wouldn't be able to give you some of the footage that I've used in this video because I have a premium subscription of Artlist, and that's where I get most of my stock footage from. I have uploaded a lot of footage with the course, and I will be uploading a lot of other footage. So without any further delay, let's start going ahead and I will color grade the video. So I just want you to observe my process. Now I'm gonna go ahead and fix the white balance of my video. So the white balance was really easy to fix because it didn't have a lot of issues with it. I was only able to fix it with the white balance eyedropper tool, and it really did fix my white balance. So I don't really have to go ahead and make any other changes. I'm gonna go ahead and start working on the exposure now. So my subjects are within the highlights. So my subjects are within the highlights and the midtones. I will slightly bring down my lift to bring more emphasis towards my subjects. So now I've added a little bit of levels of gamma and gain, and I've also brought down the lift. You've seen how it looks when I turn off the layer, the node, and how I turn it on and it changes everything. I can move on to working on my contrast. So this is just like a quick number of steps that I'm taking right now. It already starts to look really cool. I like how the contrasty look is making my subjects stand out from the rest of the background and everything else. This is how it looked just with the white balance fixed. This is how it looks with the exposure fixed as well as the contrast dialed in. I want to add my secret sauce. So do you see how it's making a lot of difference? I'm gonna dial it back up just a little bit because I don't want everything to be like extremely dark or whatever. I want to show you how it looks in full screen. Without the contrast, this is how it looks. With just the white balance fixed and the exposure fixed. When I add my contrast, this is how it looks. And I'm gonna play the video for you now. So it already starts looking really nice, and it already starts looking that it has that vibe to it. It's going in the direction that we want it to as a color artist. This is how I go about all of the steps whenever I'm color grading my videos. I'm gonna move to the next video and show you how I will do that one. So here I have another piece of footage. I'm gonna start going ahead and color grading it for you. It doesn't matter what kind of footage you have, you just have to observe what I do in the process. And whichever footage you have, you can copy the same methods that I've taught you and do the same things to get similar results. So if you don't have this exact footage, that does not matter. I want you to start going through the process just like I've taught you, and that is going to refine your color grading skills. So let's go ahead and start color grading it. My colors look pretty fine. I just need to tweak them just a little bit. So there's the white part on her shirt. That's not going to do a lot. In this case, I will have to use the offset just a little bit. But the natural environment over here looks pretty warm because they're in the sunlight. So my subjects are existing within the midtones and the highlights. Very few parts of my subjects are in the shadows. So I'm going to focus on gamma, which is midtones, and gain, which is highlights. Highlights are already bumped up, so I'm not going to touch them. whichever part my subjects exist within, I'm not going to bring that down because that is going to take emphasis away from my subject. That is the general rule. I'm going to increase gamma a little bit. Bring down lift. Increase the shadows. Let's see. Very slight difference because without the exposure dialed in, they were looking flatter. Now they have a little bit more contrast, so I'm gonna bump up the gamma just a little bit more. Not too much because I don't want the highlights to be washed out. And then bring down my shadows just a little bit. So this is how they were looking washed out without the exposure, with only the white balance fixed. This is how they look now. More emphasis on our subject through the contrast and everything that is already being created. Sometimes you will get footage that already has so much contrast in it that you don't need to put a lot of contrast. So you'll see how things work when I fix this video, because this is an example of such videos that I'm talking about. I'm not going to make a lot of changes because there's already a lot of contrast in my video. I'll bring it down just a little bit, not too much. Without the contrast, this is how it looks. This is how it looks with the contrast. If I turn off the exposure and contrast nodes, this is how it looks. And this is how it looks with the contrast and exposure dialed in. Let's see that in full screen. There's a little bit of green tint that I can see on my subject's skin. A little bit. So I'm gonna take that out. I'm not gonna touch the white balance layer because that's not what I want to do. I will create a look node. And then I will go to color bars, bring down a little bit of the green, and boom, it looks much better. It looks a little bit more pinkish, so I'm gonna dial that back in. Maybe I can also add my own values. So instead of bringing it to 24, I can do 24.5. Let's see what that does. Yep, perfect. So with the green tint, see how the skin looks? I'm gonna zoom in and show you. Especially look at the boy's skin. So without with the tint, the green tint that I was talking about, I did not like that. It makes things look a bit ugly. Because green usually is used to invoke disgust as well. You will see in a lot of movies, in a lot of animated movies, characters that are evil, vile, they're usually depicted with green because that invokes disgust for some reason. And when I brought down green overall in my video by half a point, this is how it looks. Let's look at it again. Turn off. This is how it looked. Turn on. This is how it looks. And looks much better. Let's do it in full screen. This is how it looked when there was a green tint in my subject's skin. And this is how it looks after I fixed it. So here everything is okay. I can move to my next video. So here's a video that I recorded with my Sony FX3. First of all, because my So here's a video that I recorded with my Sony FX3. First of all, because my video is vertical, I'm gonna change the orientation of my settings of my project. So I'm gonna go down here to project settings and click on use vertical resolution and simply press save. This makes the orientation of my view vertical. So I'm gonna go ahead and first convert it to Rec 709. Okay. Then I'm gonna fix the white balance. Things are more neutral over here, so I'm gonna bring down, and it's kind of slightly towards the warmer side. So I'm gonna dial my offset and bring it in the middle, not too much. Here, somewhere around here. This is how it looked before, this is how it looks after. Before, after, more neutral, slightly warmer tones exist within the offset when I'm fixing it, so I'm gonna dial it even further towards the blue part, like this part of the color wheel, because it was slightly over here towards the reds and the yellows. Turn off, turn on, turn off, turn on. White balance is fixed. All right, let's find out. 194. Yes. So it was slightly, very slightly warm, but not too warm. So it was more neutral and very slightly warm, I would say, somewhere in between. So these values are fine. 185, 186, 188, 192. That's fine because there was slightly more warmer lighting when it comes to the settings that I had over there when I was shooting it. So with the white balance fixed, I will now work on exposure. So over here, I see, first of all, this is my emphasis. The hands and the phone in it, not here and everything. So over here, naturally, when you look at the footage, your eyes are gonna go first over here, somewhere around here, and then they're gonna go here because this part is lighter or brighter. So I want to try as much as I can in the first part of fixing the lighting and exposure to bring it down and bring the focus towards this area. And there are several steps that we can use to achieve that. Fixing the lighting through these wheels and everything is the first step. And then later on, we're going to do advanced lighting corrections and everything. But this is the primary lighting correction. And we're going to try our best to work over here as much as we can. So my subject exists within the midtones, mostly. I don't really have a lot of highlights over here. So I'm gonna work with gamma because gamma is midtones. That way, now I have my subject and my object almost close to the brightness of everything else. But now I'm gonna try to bring the brightness of everything else down. And remember, all of these wheels affect almost all of the sections more or less. They affect the section more that they're made for, but they also affect the sections to their right and left. I'm going to bring down gain, but it's also affecting my midtones. See? Slightly bring up my gamma to see if that does anything. Bring down the gain so that this part is less bright. Bring up gamma. Now there is more emphasis over here as opposed to over here. So when you see your eyes either go here or here, depends. Bring gamma further down as much as I can without destroying the footage. Sorry, bring gain down. I apologize. Bring up gamma. And now I'm starting to get a better picture. So this is how it was before. Complete emphasis on the printer and everything. And this is how it is now. So I've kind of brought a lot more emphasis, and I've divided the emphasis on the printer and the hands. That's all I could do with my primary color wheels. I'm going to create another node and start working on my contrast. And probably by bringing the highlights down, we'll see. No, that doesn't cut it. So it's all a trial and error. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Probably gonna bring the shadows down a little bit, just so I want to add that contrasty look. And we'll work on this later on. I'll show you when I work with power windows and everything. I'm gonna go to log wheels, bring down darkness, probably up to -12. So this is how it looked before. This is how it looks with everything dialed in. This is how it looks without exposure and contrast. This is how it looks with our exposure and contrast dialed in. And I'm going to play it for you and see how it goes. See, there's a lot more emphasis over here. Even with so we create focus with a lot of things. We created with the lens blur, lighting, everything. So you see how I've created a lot more emphasis on the subject's hands and the phone. So this is my personal way of going about with color grading and everything. And this is the right method because this is what pro colorists do. This is how they go step by step by first fixing the white balance, then working on the exposure, which is lighting in your footage, and then working on contrast. The next thing that we're going to do now is, after everything is fixed, we're going to work on our colors. How to boost colors, how to work with saturation, and how to work with different curves and everything, because color grading also is a lot more about how colors look when it comes to your videos. So I will see in the next section, and I'm really excited to start that sections because that is where things start getting a lot more exciting.